When a police officer stopped a black woman on a busy street, he thought it was just another routine encounter. His arrogant tone and dismissive attitude made it clear he was judging her based on appearances. But what he didn't know was that the woman standing calmly before him wasn't just any citizen. She was his trainer. This isn't just a story about mistaken identity. It's a powerful lesson about accountability, respect, and the dangers of prejudice. What happens when she reveals her true identity will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Angela Carter was no ordinary citizen. As one of the most respected police trainers in the region, she had spent over 15 years shaping recruits into effective, fair, and community-focused officers. Known for her calm and composed demeanor, Angela believed in leading by example and emphasizing respect in every interaction. But on this particular day, her identity was far from obvious. Walking through a bustling downtown street, Angela carried a briefcase filled with training materials and her badge. She was on her way to lead a seminar on professional conduct, a lesson she had taught countless times before. She didn't expect to encounter an actual example of what not to do. Officer Mark Reynolds, a new recruit trying to assert himself, noticed Angela. Without knowing who she was, he saw her as out of place and decided to act on an assumption. He approached her with an authoritative tone, his overconfidence masking his lack of judgment. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out. "What are you doing here?" Angela turned calmly, already sensing the tone of the interaction. "I'm heading to a meeting," she replied politely. Reynolds glanced at her briefcase and added, "I'll need to see some ID and check that bag." As Angela opened the briefcase, revealing her badge and materials, Reynolds froze. His eyes widened as he realized who she was. The woman he had stopped was no ordinary citizen. She was his trainer, the person responsible for teaching him how to handle situations like this. Angela stood poised, ready to address his behavior, while Reynolds scrambled to process what had just happened. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, as Officer Reynolds stood frozen, staring at the badge in Angela's briefcase. His confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning realization. Yet, rather than admitting his mistake outright, his defensiveness kicked in. "Well, I didn't know who you were," Reynolds said, trying to sound assertive but failing to hide the edge of uncertainty in his voice. "Anyone carrying a bag like that could look suspicious." Angela closed the briefcase with deliberate calm. Her expression remained neutral, but her sharp gaze conveyed her growing disappointment. "Suspicious?" she echoed, her voice steady. "Officer Reynolds, I've complied with everything you asked. I provided my ID and I explained why I'm here." "What exactly about me seemed suspicious?" Reynolds hesitated, unable to provide a concrete answer. "It's just, this area has seen some issues lately. I was just doing my job," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Angela tilted her head slightly, her tone growing sharper. "Doing your job, you say? Tell me, officer, does your job include making assumptions about people based on their appearance or the fact that they're carrying a briefcase?" The murmurs of nearby bystanders began to grow as people stopped to watch the unfolding interaction. Some discreetly pulled out their phones to record, sensing that this was no ordinary encounter. Reynolds noticed the growing attention and seemed to grow more flustered. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble," Reynolds said defensively, crossing his arms. "But as an officer, I have to be thorough. You know how it is." Angela took a slow, deliberate breath. "Oh, I know exactly how it is," she replied. "I've spent over 15 years teaching officers like you what it means to be thorough, and more importantly, what it means to serve with professionalism and respect. What you've demonstrated here today is neither. Reynolds shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable, but still unwilling to fully admit fault. "Look, ma'am, if I made a mistake, I'm sorry," he said, his tone more subdued. "But I was just trying to ensure everything was in order." Angela's eyes narrowed slightly. "A mistake?" she repeated. "Do you realize how dangerous mistakes like this can be? Stopping someone without cause, questioning them based on assumptions, and escalating a situation that didn't need to escalate. Those aren't minor errors. Those are failures in judgment, and they have consequences." The growing crowd murmured in agreement, their attention fixed on Angela as she spoke with authority and composure. For Reynolds, the shift in power was becoming more evident with each passing moment. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a mix of embarrassment and unease. Angela stepped closer, her calm yet commanding presence impossible to ignore. "Officer Reynolds," she said, her voice firm but measured, "what's the purpose of de-escalation training?" Reynolds hesitated, then answered quietly, "To prevent unnecessary conflict and ensure safety." "Exactly," Angela said. "And what you've done here today is the opposite. Instead of de-escalating, you've escalated this interaction based on nothing more than your own assumptions." Reynolds glanced around nervously, noticing that several of the bystanders were still recording. The weight of public scrutiny seemed to settle on him all at once. "I didn't mean to escalate anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you did," Angela replied, "and as your trainer, it's my responsibility to ensure you understand the seriousness of your actions." The revelation of Angela's authority had shaken Reynolds, but her words were what truly began to sink in. He looked at her with a mixture of regret and disbelief, realizing that the woman he had just attempted to intimidate was not only his superior in knowledge, but also someone with the power to shape his career. "I didn't realize," he started, his voice trailing off. Angela held up a hand to stop him. "That's precisely the problem, Officer Reynolds. You didn't realize. You didn't think. And that lack of awareness is exactly what we work to eliminate during training. Because out here, in the real world, those mistakes have real consequences for the people you serve and for yourself." The crowd, now larger than before, was no longer silent. Some people openly voiced their support for Angela, while others shook their heads at Reynolds' behavior. "That's what we need. Someone to hold these guys accountable," one bystander said. "About time someone stood up to this nonsense," another added. Reynolds' face reddened as the weight of the moment grew heavier. He looked down, avoiding the eyes of the crowd and Angela, who continued to address him with unwavering authority. "I'll be filing a formal report about this incident," Angela said, her tone leaving no room for argument, "and we'll be discussing it further at the academy. You'll have the opportunity to explain your actions thoroughly." Reynolds nodded, his earlier defiance now replaced by quiet resignation. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. Angela turned to the crowd, addressing them briefly. "Thank you for your support," she said. "It's important that we hold one another accountable, whether we're citizens or officers." The crowd applauded as Angela walked away, her briefcase in hand. For Reynolds, the moment was far from over. The weight of what had happened would follow him into the academy, where Angela would ensure he learned the lesson he so desperately needed. Angela's calm exit from the scene was only the beginning of what would become a defining moment for Officer Reynolds. She headed straight to the academy, where her day of training sessions awaited, carrying her briefcase filled with materials and now the details of the encounter fresh in her mind. Meanwhile, Reynolds returned to his shift, visibly shaken and dreading what was to come. The following morning, Reynolds received a direct order to report to the training academy. When he arrived, he found himself in a large, well-lit training room filled with officers at various stages of their careers. Angela Carter stood at the front of the room, addressing the group with her signature poise. Her presence commanded respect, and even those who hadn't interacted with her personally knew of her reputation as one of the best trainers in the department. As Reynolds entered the room, their eyes met briefly. He could feel the weight of her authority as she gestured for him to sit in the front row. The session began without fanfare, but it quickly became clear that Angela had tailored the lesson to address not just Reynolds's behavior, but the broader issues it represented. Angela's voice was calm but firm as she began. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of de-escalation, professionalism, and the assumptions we make in the field, she said, pacing slowly in front of the group. These aren't just abstract concepts. They are the foundation of effective policing and the trust we build or destroy with the communities we serve. She turned to the group, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds," she said, her tone measured but pointed. "Would you care to share your thoughts on what it means to approach a situation professionally?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the attention of the room now squarely on him. "It means treating people fairly and with respect," he said hesitantly. Angela nodded. "Exactly. And tell me, officer, what happens when we fail to do that?" Reynolds hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We lose trust." "Correct," Angela said. Her tone sharpened slightly as she continued. "And in losing that trust, we undermine not only ourselves but the entire department. Every officer in this room depends on that trust to do their job effectively. When we erode it, we're not just making our jobs harder, we're failing the communities we're sworn to serve." Angela then addressed the entire group. "Let me give you an example," she said. "Imagine an officer stopping someone on the street, not because they've done anything wrong, but because of how they look or where they happen to be. Imagine that officer escalating the situation unnecessarily, even when the individual has complied fully. What message does that send to the public?" A murmur rippled through the room. Some officers nodded, clearly understanding the implication. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances, likely recalling moments where they had fallen short themselves. "Now," Angela continued, her voice steady, "imagine that the individual in question wasn't just a private citizen, but someone with the authority and experience to hold that officer accountable. How might that change the outcome?" The room was silent. Reynolds stared at his hands, knowing that everyone in the room understood the example was about him. Angela turned back to Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds," she said, "you had an opportunity yesterday to demonstrate professionalism and respect. Instead, you chose to escalate a situation that required neither. Can you tell me why?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "I thought I was doing my job," he said quietly. "But I made assumptions, and I was wrong." Angela nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Acknowledging our mistakes is the first step toward growth," she said. "But understanding why we made those mistakes is just as important. Your job isn't just to enforce the law, it's to serve the community with fairness and integrity. Every decision you make reflects not only on you but on the entire department." Reynolds looked up, meeting Angela's gaze. "I realize now that I judged you based on assumptions," he admitted. "I didn't think about how that would come across or the harm it could cause." Angela's tone remained steady. "And what have you learned from this experience?" "That I need to think before I act," Reynolds said. "To treat everyone with respect no matter what, and to trust the process instead of jumping to conclusions. Angela nodded, her expression neutral but approving. Good. Let this be a reminder not just for you, but for everyone here. The authority we carry is a privilege, not a right. If we misuse it, we not only harm others, but also compromise the values we're sworn to uphold. As the session drew to a close, Angela addressed the group one final time. This isn't about calling out one person. It's about all of us holding ourselves to a higher standard. Every interaction we have shapes the relationship between law enforcement and the community. Let's make sure those interactions build trust, not tear it down. The room erupted into quiet applause as Angela stepped back, her words resonating deeply with the officers present. For Reynolds, the lesson was clear. Respect and professionalism weren't just concepts to be discussed in training, they were values to be practiced in every moment. As the training session ended, Officer Reynolds lingered behind, his mind replaying the events of the previous day and the session that had just concluded. For the first time in his career, he truly understood how much weight his badge carried, not just as a symbol of authority, but as a responsibility to serve others with respect and fairness. After the session, Angela Carter approached Reynolds. She could see the change in his demeanor. His earlier defensiveness had given way to reflection and remorse. "Walk with me, Officer Reynolds," she said, gesturing toward the hallway. As they walked, Angela shared more about her journey. "I didn't become a trainer by accident," she began. "I started my career in law enforcement just like you, full of ambition and ready to make a difference. But early on, I saw how assumptions and biases could cloud judgment and harm the very people we're meant to protect." Reynolds listened intently as Angela described her years of experience on the streets, working her way up from a patrol officer to a detective, and, eventually, to her current role as a trainer. "I've seen the best and worst of this profession," she said. "And I've dedicated my career to ensuring that officers like you have the tools and mindset to make decisions that build trust rather than destroy it." Her story wasn't just about her professional accomplishments. It was a testament to her resilience and her deep commitment to justice. It became clear to Reynolds that Angela wasn't just a trainer. She was a leader who had earned her position through hard work, integrity, and an unshakable belief in doing what was right. As they reached the end of the hallway, Reynolds stopped and turned to Angela. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "Not just for what happened yesterday, but for how I let my assumptions get the better of me. I realize now that I was wrong, not just in my actions, but in my mindset." Angela nodded, her expression softening. "Acknowledging your mistakes is an important step, Officer Reynolds," she said. "But what matters most is what you do moving forward. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress." Reynolds nodded, her words striking a chord. "I'm ready to learn," he said. "To be better, not just for myself, but for the people I serve." Angela smiled, her tone gentle but firm. "Then start by remembering this. Every person you encounter deserves respect. Whether they're walking down the street, driving an old car, or carrying a briefcase, your job is to approach them with fairness and professionalism. Assumptions have no place in this work." Reynolds absorbed her words, realizing how much he had to unlearn and how much more he had to grow. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for holding me accountable, and for not giving up on me." Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's what I'm here for, Officer Reynolds. But accountability doesn't stop with me. It's something you'll need to practice every day, in every interaction." Word of the incident and Angela's training session spread throughout the department, sparking conversations among officers about their own biases and behavior. Some reflected on past interactions, realizing how easily assumptions could cloud their judgment. Others sought out Angela for guidance, eager to improve their approach to policing. The department's leadership took notice, implementing new protocols for de-escalation and bias training, with Angela leading the charge. What began as a single moment of conflict became a catalyst for systemic change, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond Officer Reynolds. Angela Carter's encounter with Officer Reynolds sparked not just a personal transformation, but a departmental and community-wide ripple effect. What began as a routine moment of judgment unfolded into a profound lesson in accountability, respect, and growth, both for Reynolds and for the system he represented. Angela's leadership within the department didn't waver after the incident. Instead, she used the moment as an opportunity to highlight systemic shortcomings that often went unaddressed. Her ability to turn a tense situation into a learning moment wasn't just a testament to her composure, but also to her dedication to creating meaningful change. Angela firmly believed that every officer, no matter how experienced or new, carried the potential to either build trust with the community or erode it with their actions. Reynolds, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying the encounter in his mind. It wasn't just the embarrassment of being corrected by Angela that lingered. It was the realization that he had acted impulsively, driven by bias rather than evidence or professionalism. For days after the incident, he reflected on her words. Every decision you make reflects not only on you but on the entire department. Those words echoed in his head, pushing him to confront his own shortcomings. Recognizing the need for growth, Reynolds took steps to ensure he wouldn't repeat his mistakes. He volunteered to attend additional training sessions and took an active role in Angela's new initiative aimed at fostering better relationships between law enforcement and the community. He sought feedback from his peers, asking for honest critiques of his behavior. For the first time in his career, Reynolds began to see himself not just as an enforcer of the law, but as a bridge between the department and the people it served. Angela, on the other hand, didn't focus on Reynolds' actions alone. She understood that his behavior was part of a larger issue within law enforcement, one that required systemic change. Using the incident as a springboard, she introduced new programs that emphasized empathy, de-escalation, and accountability. These weren't just theoretical lessons, but practical tools officers could use in their daily interactions. Angela's ability to connect with both seasoned officers and fresh recruits made her training sessions impactful and transformative. The community responded with cautious optimism. Angela's poise and leadership during the encounter with Reynolds earned her admiration from residents, many of whom had their own stories of being unfairly judged or treated. Town hall meetings became a regular occurrence, creating a platform for open dialogue between the police department and the people it served. At one such meeting, Angela addressed the crowd with her signature blend of firmness and empathy. "We all make mistakes," she said, her voice steady. "But what defines us isn't the mistakes we make. It's how we learn from them. Trust isn't built overnight, but it starts with conversations like these. Together, we can create a system that serves everyone with fairness and respect." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring residents and officers alike to take part in building a better future. The changes weren't immediate, but they were meaningful. Complaints about officer misconduct began to decrease, while positive feedback from residents increased. The department saw a tangible shift in morale and purpose as Angela's programs took root. Reynolds' transformation was perhaps the most visible. In the months following the incident, he became a model for growth within the department. He approached every interaction with a newfound sense of humility and professionalism. During a routine patrol one afternoon, he encountered a man walking down the street carrying a large bag. A year ago, he might have made an assumption about the man's intentions, but this time, Reynolds greeted him with a smile and a simple, "Good afternoon. Everything okay today?" The man, surprised by Reynolds' friendly tone, nodded and replied, "Yeah, just heading to work." The exchange was brief but powerful. It symbolized how far Reynolds had come and the kind of officer he aspired to be, one who treated every person with respect, regardless of appearances. Angela noticed his progress and commended him during a follow-up meeting. "It's not about being perfect," she told him. "It's about making consistent efforts to be better. And you've shown that you're willing to do the work." Reynolds thanked her, his voice filled with gratitude. "You didn't just hold me accountable," he said. "You gave me the chance to grow. That's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my career." Beyond the department, Angela's initiatives began to attract attention from other agencies. Her success in transforming officer-community relationships became a model for neighboring cities. She partnered with law enforcement leaders across the region, sharing her programs and insights to inspire broader change. Her work reminded everyone that real transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of small, consistent actions that build trust and foster understanding. For the community, Angela's efforts meant more than just improved policing. It symbolized hope. Residents felt empowered to share their concerns and experiences, knowing their voices would be heard and respected. Angela's ability to bridge the gap between officers and the people they served created a foundation for long-term trust and collaboration. The department itself underwent significant changes. Under Angela's leadership, training programs became more immersive and practical, focusing on real-world scenarios and the importance of empathy. Officers were encouraged to spend time engaging with residents outside of enforcement activities, building rapport and breaking down barriers. Feedback mechanisms allowed citizens to share their experiences with officers, creating accountability and transparency that hadn't existed before. At a department-wide meeting months later, the chief of police publicly acknowledged Angela's contributions. "Her work has not only transformed this department," he said, "but has reminded us all why we chose this profession in the first place, to serve with integrity, fairness, and respect." Angela's vision extended far beyond her own department. She believed that the lessons learned in her city could inspire change elsewhere, and she worked tirelessly to ensure that her programs reached as many officers as possible. Her unwavering belief in the power of education and accountability became a beacon of hope for law enforcement agencies across the country. For Angela, the work was never about recognition. It was about creating a system where every officer understood the weight of their responsibility, and every citizen felt respected and protected. Her encounter with Reynolds was just one chapter in a larger story of resilience, leadership, and the pursuit of justice. The story of Angela Carter and Officer Reynolds is a powerful reminder that growth begins with accountability. What started as a moment of poor judgment turned into an opportunity for transformation, not just for one officer, but for an entire department and community. Angela's calm, composed approach and unwavering dedication to fairness showcased how moments of conflict can lead to meaningful change when handled with integrity. Officer Reynolds' journey from defensiveness to reflection and growth is a testament to the power of humility and the willingness to learn. His story reminds us that everyone has the capacity to change if they commit to listening, understanding, and improving. Angela's leadership, on the other hand, highlights the importance of holding ourselves and others accountable to ensure that respect and professionalism guide our actions. What about you? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where someone's assumptions were challenged in a meaningful way? How do you think we can create a society where respect and fairness are the norm? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales of growth, justice, and transformation. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another story that challenges perspectives and ignites change. Until then, remember, accountability is the first step toward building a better future.